The air was thick and tasted of rust and impending rain, but it was the color of the sky that choked Kaelen the most. Above the Gothic spikes of Castle Noctis, the moon hung a brutal, bruised scarlet, shedding light only on the obsidian plate of the Dark Legion and the pale, hungry faces of the ghouls swarming the earth. Kaelen stood alone on the broken cobblestones of the abandoned town square, a small, stubborn anchor against a tide of darkness that stretched back to the castle gate, where the Empress stood. He was surrounded. Not by a mere patrol, but by the vanguard of Lord Valerius's elite, the very legion that had scourged the northern territories. 200 heavily armored vampire soldiers, each a killing machine honed by centuries of undeath, and an unsettling periphery of snarling ghouls, low-grade horrors eager for fresh blood. The title of the Empress's forces was an exaggeration. They were not simply an army, they were a collective judgment against all who still dared to draw breath under the natural sun. Kaelen ignored the ghouls, their frantic, clawing movements beneath his focus. He fixed his gaze solely on the command center, the high temporary battlement erected for this specific theatrical display of power. Standing upon it, flanked by the cold, black banner of the Blood Court, was the one he had hunted for 3 harrowing years. Empress Seraphina. She was not on the ground, fighting in the dust with her subordinates. She was elevated, a perfect, terrifying silhouette against the blood moon. Her gown was made of darkness and shadow, cinched by a crown of thorns woven from blackened silver. Her skin was alabaster, her hair like spun moonlight, and her eyes, even from this distance, glowed with an unervingly patient, crimson light. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her very presence was a wave of oppressive ancient power that made the air feel thin and poisonous. By her side stood Lord Valerius, his face a mask of scorn beneath his helm, the general who found this entire affair a tedious waste of time. Kaelen tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. It was not a grand, ornate weapon of legend. It was a simple, single-edged blade, heavy and practical, but as he channeled his focus, the metal began to hum, and an ethereal, electric blue light erupted along the length of the steel. It was ether, the pure, raw energy that vampires feared more than holy water. The blade did not just glow, it crackled, spitting sparks that sizzled the moisture in the air. Valerius, the general, finally broke the silence, his voice a cold, carrying boom that echoed off the ruined stone buildings. Such foolish theatrics. One lone dog attempting to hold back the tide. Empress Seraphina permits this charade, mortal, because she is curious about your death. The 200 vampires in the Legion raised their shields and spears in a deafening, unified clang. They were disciplined, their formation flawless, a moving wall of impenetrable armor. Kaelen knew he could not defeat them all. His goal was never to win this battle, only to announce his presence and his threat. "My name is Kaelen," he shouted back, his voice raw but unwavering. "And I am here to end your bloodline, Valerius. Tell your Empress that her reign of fear dies tonight, starting with her most loyal mutt." The insult, direct and public, was the spark. Valerius roared, an inhuman sound of rage, and dropped his hand. "Advance. Bring me his head and break that trinket he holds." The Legion did not charge. They marched, a terrifying rhythmic advance that emphasized their confidence and their numbers. They knew they were superior. The ghouls, however, were less patient. Driven by the scent of Kaelen's fear, or maybe his unnatural electric power, a dozen of them lunged first, scrambling over the rubble, their claws scraping against the stones. Kaelen moved. He did not dodge or parry their clumsy attacks. He met them head-on. The ether blade sang as it connected, not just cutting flesh but superheating the necrotic tissue. The first 2 ghouls dissolved in a flash of blue light and acrid smoke, their cries cut short. The raw power of the ether was terrifyingly efficient against the corrupted. But the Legion was different. The first rank was upon him, shields interlocking. Kaelen drove his blade into the seam between 2 shields, and the ether did its work, not breaking the steel but overloading it. The metallic structure vaporized in a small, concentrated burst, throwing the 2 vampires back, momentarily disrupting the flawless line. He followed the opening, spinning low, sweeping his legs to take out the legs of a third, and as the vampire fell, Kaelen brought the ether blade down. The vampire soldier, hardened by time, screamed as the pure energy burned through their undead heart. 3 down. 197 to go. The flanking ranks now rushed to close the gap, no longer marching but surging. Kaelen felt the sheer pressure of their weight, the relentless push of spear points seeking gaps in his light armor. He was fast, impossibly fast for a mortal, his movements economical and lethal. He blocked a spear with his forearm guard, the metal groaning, and used the recoil to bring his sword around in a savage arc that severed 3 spear shafts. It was during this desperate, exhilarating flurry that the army paused. Not because of a command but because of what they saw. Kaelen was not fighting for survival. He was fighting with a terrifying efficiency that contradicted his hopeless situation. He was not only parrying, but exploiting every single fraction of a second, every flawed movement. The ground around him was already littered with smoking, half-dissolved corpses of ghouls and 24 stunned, wounded vampire soldiers. Kaelen used the brief moment of hesitation to glance up. His heart hammered in his chest, not from fear, but from the brutal exertion and the sheer force required to channel the ether. And that was when he met her gaze. Empress Seraphina had moved forward slightly on the battlement. The scorn had vanished from Lord Valerius's face, replaced by a confused anger. But Seraphina's expression was something else entirely. She was leaning forward, her crimson eyes narrowed, not in fury but in intense, calculating wonder. She had witnessed the stand. She had seen the power of the ether blade. She was not stunned by his defiance, but by the sheer impossibility of his weapon and his skill. The whole army, from Valerius down to the newest soldier, had momentarily frozen, witnessing the spectacle of one mortal warrior holding the line against the Dark Legion's might. They were stunned. This was his moment. Kaelen knew he was running on borrowed time, the ether channeling demanding a terrifying toll on his physical body. His breath was ragged. He had made his statement. With one final desperate surge of energy, Kaelen brought the glowing blade down onto the cobblestones beneath him. The impact was not a clang but a muffled explosion. The ether energy channeled through the ground, cracking the stone and throwing up a thick screen of dust and debris, momentarily blinding the closest ranks of the Dark Legion. "I will see you soon, Valerius," Kaelen yelled, not waiting for a reply. He pivoted, using the cover of the swirling dust, and ran headlong into the shadows of the nearest ruined building. The chaos erupted behind him as the vampires, stunned by the blinding light and the unexpected retreat, stumbled into the smoke. He ran. He ran not because he was defeated, but because the look in Empress Seraphina's eyes had told him one thing. She was no longer merely dismissing him. She was interested. And in the courts of the undead, interest from the Empress was far more dangerous than her immediate wrath. Kaelen plunged into the cold, dark alleyway, his lungs burning, the ether sword dimming back into mundane steel. The chase had begun, and he knew now that the Empress was watching his every move, intrigued by the lone warrior who dared to fight her army, and who had managed to stun them all. His mission had just become infinitely more complicated, and infinitely more deadly. He was alone, hunted by the most powerful creature in the land, but he held the only weapon that could truly challenge her reign. The sting of the retreat was immediate, a metallic taste in Kaelen's mouth that had nothing to do with the exertion and everything to do with the failure to strike a killing blow. He moved like a shadow through the decaying market stalls, the ruins of homes abandoned a generation ago when Seraphina's darkness had first settled upon the north. The dust cloud he had created bought him perhaps 60 seconds. 60 seconds against an army that could track heat, sound, and the faint, residual scent of ether. He didn't bother with silence. Silence was for ghosts. He needed speed. He vaulted over a collapsed wall, the heavy thump of his boots muffled slightly by the wet soil of a forgotten garden. The raw power needed to channel the ether still coursed through his veins, leaving him momentarily shaky but acutely aware. Behind him, the roar of Lord Valerius was a physical thing, a sound of frustrated, humiliated power. "Spread out. Find the filth. He is wounded and slow. No soldier is to return without his head." Kaelen knew Valerius was lying about him being wounded, but the threat was real. The general would not tolerate the public spectacle of his elite legion being momentarily stunned by one mortal. Valerius would treat the failure with blood, Kaelen's or that of his own men. He aimed for the old catacombs beneath the city's heart, a place of convoluted tunnels and collapsed sections that even the undead found tedious to navigate. He slipped down a crumbling stone staircase hidden behind a broken statue of a forgotten king, dropping into the damp, cold blackness. The air here was heavy with mold and the distant scent of disturbed earth, a welcome change from the smoke and blood. As his eyes adjusted, Kaelen moved faster, relying on memory and instinct. He had spent months charting these paths, knowing this was his only lifeline should his frontal assault fail. He could hear the faint, echoing shouts of the vampire soldiers above, their heavy boots thudding on the stone, but they were already too late. They were searching the horizontal plane. Kaelen was descending into the vertical. He reached a junction where 3 tunnels met, the intersection pitch black. Kaelen stopped, leaning against the cold wall, finally allowing himself a moment to draw a deep, shaky breath. He closed his eyes, visualizing the face of the one he sought, a memory both precious and corrosive, the fuel for his insane crusade. He had to remind himself why he stood alone against an empress. A sudden, sharp clicking sound cut through the oppressive silence, instantly shattering his moment of reflection. Kaelen's eyes snapped open. The ether blade had been sheathed, but his hand flew to the secondary weapon at his hip, a large, silver-hilted dagger. He had thought he was alone. The clicking sound came again, closer this time, followed by the metallic shing of a small crossbow being cocked. "Move and you die, warrior," a low, clear female voice commanded, the accent regional, belonging to the Free Mountain tribes. And unlike the overly dramatic general upstairs, "I will not miss." Kaelen didn't move. He kept his back pressed against the wall. "I am not with the Empress," he stated plainly, his voice low. "I know that much," the voice retorted, laced with dry cynicism. "I watched you put on quite the show for Her Highness. Very flashy, very stupid. You drew enough attention to get half the city searched. You've ruined a perfectly good night for underground travel. Then you are a survivor," Kaelen countered. "We want the same thing. We want survival. You want martyrdom," the voice corrected. "Now drop the secondary weapon slowly. Then tell me who you are and how a mortal managed to get his hands on an ether forge." Kaelen hesitated. The crossbow bolt, if silver, would be lethal. If it was a common bolt, it would still impair him long enough for her to finish the job. He slowly unclipped the dagger and let it fall to the earthen floor. He had no choice. Anyone down here, surviving this long under Seraphina's nose, was dangerous and likely desperate. "My name is Kaelen," he repeated, turning slowly to face his captor. In the faint, diffuse light filtering from a crack in the ceiling high above, he saw her. She was Lyra. She was crouched low, dressed in dark, functional leather armor, the silver gleam of a healer's tools visible in a pouch at her hip, a stark contrast to the small, deadly crossbow she held aimed steadily at his chest. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and fiercely skeptical. She looked tired but entirely resolved. "Lyra," she supplied, not lowering the weapon. "And you, Kaelen of the Bright Sword, are a liability. A very loud, very visible liability. What in the blazes did you think you were doing, challenging the Empress on her doorstep?" "I was making a declaration," Kaelen said, pushing off the wall. "The war isn't fought in shadows, Lyra. It's fought when they are forced to look at you." Seraphina saw the ether blade. She knows she has a genuine threat now. Lyra let out a short, humorless laugh. She knows she has a flea to squash. Generals Valerius and his lot are already sealing off the main exits. Your declaration just forced us to move our entire supply line 3 hours earlier than planned. You've jeopardized the lives of 50 people who prefer quiet survival to grand gestures. Kaelen took a step closer. If you are with the resistance, then quiet survival has gotten you nowhere for 50 years. Valerius's army is scattering, hunting me. That means they are no longer focused on your supply lines. I bought you chaos. Use it. Lyra scrutinized him, her crossbow hand unwavering. You are arrogant and self-centered. But the damage you inflicted was impressive. The way that energy weapon worked, it was clean. Where did you get it? It's not important, Kaelen dismissed. What is important is the Empress's castle. That is where her true weakness lies. I'm going there. I assume you or your people have maps or safer routes I need. Lyra finally lowered the crossbow, but only slightly, tucking it into a wrist holster with a decisive click. Arrogance confirmed. You think you can waltz into Castle Noctis? That fortress is surrounded by wards that would turn your ether blade to charcoal before you reach the outer wall. It's not a physical structure, Kaelen. It's a magical construct, fed by ancient, corrupted power. She straightened up fully, the movement suggesting authority. The resistance is called the Sunstone Vanguard. We do not fight the Empress with swords. We fight her by starving her grip on the regions, by saving those she hunts, and by gathering the necessary knowledge to strike the core weakness. And we certainly don't stand alone in town squares making speeches. If you want to get near Noctis, you need me. And if you need me, you follow my rules. Kaelen felt a surge of professional frustration. He needed to move fast, unencumbered by the politics of resistance groups. But Lyra's knowledge of the wards around Noctis was something he couldn't ignore. His focus had been on the ether blade's raw power, assuming it could breach any barrier, but if the castle was a magical nexus, he needed a key. What are your rules? Kaelen asked, the question tasting like grudging compromise. Rule 1. No more ether displays unless absolutely necessary. We move invisibly, Lyra said, gesturing towards a narrow, almost invisible fissure in the wall. Rule 2, you drop the hero complex. You are now merely my escort, a strong arm for a critical supply run that is happening right now. Rule 3, you tell me everything about that blade the moment we are safe. It might be the weapon we have been looking for. Kaelen picked up his dagger, sheathing it with a soft snick. I need to reach the deepest parts of Castle Noctis. I am looking for someone who was taken by Seraphina years ago. I need to know if they are still alive and if she is using them. Lyra's sharp gaze softened, recognizing the deep, underlying pain in his voice that transcended mere heroism. A personal mission. I should have guessed. Fine. The deeper parts of Noctis are where she keeps the oldest prisoners and the darkest secrets. We might not be looking for the same thing, Kaelen, but our paths are converging on the same dark spot. Come on. There is a tunnel here that bypasses the sealed lower levels. We need to be out of the city limits by dawn. She stepped into the fissure, disappearing instantly into the darkness. Kaelen followed, leaving the stench of the vampires and the shame of his retreat behind. He had found an unexpected and likely troublesome ally. The solo warrior had been forced to join a team, if only temporarily. The shadow war for the Sunstone Vanguard had begun, and their first order of business was to escape the dragnet that his dramatic confrontation had triggered. He knew Seraphina would not rest until she understood the weapon that had momentarily stunned her army. His public stand had given him an enemy's interest, and his alliance with Lyra now gave him a route to pursue his deadly intent. The tunnel was barely more than a jagged crack in the earth, a tight squeeze that reeked of stale air and damp stone. Kaelen moved behind Lyra, his broad shoulders scraping against the rough rock, the metallic tang of his armor echoing faintly in the claustrophobic space. Lyra, despite her smaller stature, moved with an efficiency that suggested years of traversing such hidden paths. Her occasional, curt instructions were barely audible whispers, each one demanding absolute precision. Watch the footing here, loose shale, she murmured, her voice a low rustle. Don't snag your armor on the crystal veins, they vibrate, can be heard for miles. Kaelen nodded, though she couldn't see him in the near-total darkness. He relied on the faint glow emanating from Lyra's open hand, a soft, green luminescence that hovered just above her palm, barely illuminating their immediate path. It was a simple mage light but effective. He admired her discipline. Not once had she complained about his earlier reckless display. Her focus was purely on the task at hand, escape. They moved for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper beneath the city. The sounds of the Dark Legion above gradually faded, replaced by the rhythmic drip of water and the rustle of unseen creatures. Kaelen's thoughts drifted back to the Empress, to the unnerving curiosity in her crimson eyes. He had wanted to provoke her, to draw her attention, and he had succeeded beyond expectation. But what now? A provoked predator was far more dangerous than an oblivious one. We're nearing a temporary safe house, Lyra finally announced, her voice slightly louder as the tunnel widened into a small cavern. It's sparsely stocked, but it'll get us through until we can link up with the main cell. As they emerged into the cavern, Kaelen saw that it was just large enough for a few people to stand comfortably. A small, meticulously arranged pile of provisions, dried meat, hardened bread, and a skin of water, sat on a ledge. Lyra immediately extinguished her mage light, plunging them into darkness again, then took out a small, almost invisible lantern that cast only a sliver of light downwards. They'll be sweeping the surface for days, Lyra explained, her voice losing some of its tight, controlled edge. Valerius will make an example of anyone caught aiding your escape. He doesn't just want your head. He wants to break the spirit of any who dare defy the Empress publicly. Kaelen sat down on a cold rock, feeling the exhaustion finally begin to settle in his bones. The ether channeling, while powerful, drained him more than any physical combat. Good, he grunted. Let him hunt me. While he hunts me, he's not harassing innocents or searching for your people. Lyra eyed him, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips in the dim light. You have a strange way of looking at self-preservation. But you're right. Your little spectacle created a massive diversion. Our supply caravan slipped out of the southern gate unimpeded. So, for that, I suppose I should thank you. Don't thank me yet, Kaelen replied, taking a gulp from the water skin she offered. The cool liquid soothed his parched throat. Now about my blade. What did you mean by an ether forge? Lyra sat opposite him, her features thoughtful. Ether isn't a common element. It's a primeval energy, chaotic and rare. Most mages can only glimpse it, let alone channel it. And to forge a blade that contains it, that doesn't shatter from its own power, that's a lost art. It shouldn't exist. There were legends of the Sun Forgers, ancient craftsmen who could bind pure energies into weapons, but they died out millennia ago. Kaelen ran a hand over the hilt of his sword, the metal cool and inert now. It was forged by my ancestors. Passed down. I just learned how to awaken it. He omitted the details of his training, the solitude, the nearly fatal attempts to master the volatile energy. Learned how to awaken it, Lyra repeated, her eyebrows arching slightly. That's like saying you learned how to breathe fire. It's an innate gift and a rare one. Tell me, Kaelen, what is your true purpose in seeking the Empress? Beyond your personal quest. Your blade and your ability could change everything. Kaelen hesitated. He trusted Lyra as much as he could trust any stranger in this world, but revealing his deepest secret, the true target of his quest, was a heavy burden. Yet, her knowledge of the castle, of the wards, made her invaluable. He needed her full cooperation, not just her grudging assistance. Seraphina took my family, Kaelen finally said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, a practiced shield. My younger sister, Elara. She was just a child. They raided our village searching for something, or someone. They found her. And they took her. She had a unique mark, a birthmark like a stylized sun on her wrist. The legends say it's a mark of the Sunforger's bloodline. Lyra's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock crossing her face. A mark of the Sunforgers? That's ancient lore. That mark is said to be a key, not just a birthmark. A key to unlocking power, to disrupting the very essence of Seraphina's reign. If your sister possessed that, Seraphina wouldn't have just taken her. She would have bound her. The word bound sent a chill down Kaelen's spine. He had always imagined Elara as a prisoner, perhaps a slave. But bound implied something far more sinister, a ritualistic, magical enslavement that would fuse her fate with Seraphina's power. Bound how? Kaelen demanded, his voice tight. Legends vary, Lyra explained, her tone grave. But the most terrifying speaks of a blood pact, where the life force of a Sunforger with the mark is used to fuel a powerful ward, or even worse, to anchor a being of immense power to this plane. It would make Seraphina almost invincible, her connection to the land unbreakable. Kaelen felt a cold dread settle in his gut. This was worse than he could have imagined. Elara wasn't just a victim, she was a living sacrifice, a battery for the Empress's malevolent power. His quest had just transformed from a rescue mission into an assassination, with his sister's life hanging in the balance. Then I need to sever that connection, Kaelen stated, his resolve hardening. Whatever it takes. Even if it means, he cut himself off, the unspoken horror of sacrificing his own sister for the greater good hanging heavy in the air. Lyra, ever pragmatic, saw the unspoken. If she is truly bound as an anchor, severing that connection might kill her. It's a risk. A terrible one. She paused, then added, but it's a risk we both share now. If Seraphina becomes truly invincible, there will be no resistance left. And no hope. So what's our next move? Kaelen asked, looking at her, a silent acknowledgement of their grim new shared purpose. The individual vendetta had merged with the Resistance's larger struggle. We rest here for a few hours, then we move towards the Whisperwood, Lyra instructed, her tone regaining its practical edge. It's a thick, enchanted forest on the border of Seraphina's domain, a place where her patrols are less effective due to the ancient magic there. It's also where the main Sunstone Vanguard cell is based. They'll have resources, information, and hopefully, a clearer path into Noctis. But remember, Kaelen, the Vanguard doesn't trust easily. Especially not a lone wolf who makes such a grand entrance. You'll have to prove you're more than just a distraction. Kaelen nodded, understanding. He was no longer just the warrior with the glowing sword. He was a symbol, a beacon of defiance that had caught the eye of the Empress. And now he was tied to a resistance, a pawn in a larger game with his sister's life, and perhaps the fate of the entire region, resting on his ability to navigate the shadows and the truth of Castle Noctis. The sun was still a distant memory, but a flicker of hope, however faint, had been kindled in the depths of the earth. After a few hours of uneasy rest in the cramped, silent cavern, Kaelen and Lyra continued their journey. The tunnels eventually led them to a hidden exit several miles outside the ruined city, opening out into the chill pre-dawn mist of the wilderness. The air was cleaner here, carrying the scent of pine and wet moss, a stark contrast to the deathly dust of Seraphina's domain. Lyra moved with the practiced grace of a tracker, constantly checking the subtle signs of the forest floor, watching for disturbed foliage or faint boot prints. Kaelen followed, his ether blade securely sheathed, relying on his mortal senses which felt frustratingly sluggish after the rush of the battle. He was used to charging headlong, not creeping like a thief. The Empress's influence is weakest here, Lyra whispered as the sun, a pale, struggling disk, finally broke the horizon. This is the Whisperwood. Ancient raw magic lingers here. It disrupts the vampiric senses and their tracking spells. As they penetrated deeper, the forest changed. The trees became colossal, their trunks covered in glowing runes that seemed to shift and fade in the half-light. The canopy was so thick that the ground remained perpetually shaded, and the silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their own footsteps. It was a beautiful, unnerving place, where Kaelen felt the sheer force of untamed power pressing down on him, a power that felt similar to yet vastly purer than the raw energy of his ether sword. Lyra stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Kaelen froze, his muscles tense. He heard it then, not the sound of pursuit but a subtle, mechanical whirring. Ward barrier, Lyra mouthed, pointing to an invisible line between two enormous, vine-covered oaks. It's a sunstone perimeter. Manned and enchanted. If you cross it without the key phrase, you'll be pinned to the ground by gravity magic and filled with silver bolts before you can blink. She stepped forward, cleared her throat, and spoke into the seemingly empty air in a dialect Kaelen didn't recognize, her voice sharp and precise. A few tense seconds passed. Then, the rhythmic whirring ceased and a section of the shimmering air shimmered, revealing two figures in heavy leather armor, their faces obscured by deep hoods. They emerged silently, their crossbows already lowered. "Lyra. You're late," one of the figures said, their voice rough and accusatory. "And who is this loud shadow you brought with you? We heard about the spectacle near Noctis. General Valerius is throwing his weight around, questioning every human traveler." "This is Kaelen," Lyra said simply, stepping past the guards. "He is essential. And yes, he is the reason Valerius is preoccupied. He carries the ether blade. He needs to see Mother Riona immediately." The two guards exchanged suspicious glances. They did not lower their guard around Kaelen. One of them, a man whose hands were scarred and calloused, stepped close to him, his eyes lingering on the leather sheath of the ether blade. "An ether blade? Legends for children," the guard scoffed. "If he's the distraction, let him be a dead distraction. This place is not a stage for heroics. He is the one who saw the Empress's face," Lyra interjected sharply, cutting the tension. "He spoke to her. He saw her reaction. Take us to Mother Riona." That seemed to be enough. The guard relented, his posture stiff but obedient. He led them through the remaining forest, the path becoming clearer until they arrived at a hidden clearing. The clearing was centered around a single, massive tree, its bark carved with millennia of runes and symbols. Scattered around it were various signs of a semi-permanent camp, well-maintained cooking fires, weapon racks, and makeshift benches. About 20 people were gathered, a mix of seasoned warriors, dedicated mages, and quiet strategists, all dressed in practical, earth-toned clothing. This was the Sunstone Vanguard's main operating cell. The atmosphere was not one of camaraderie, but of focused, strained silence. When Lyra and Kaelen entered, all activity stopped. Every eye, wary and assessing, turned to the lone warrior with the reputation for impossible audacity. Kaelen felt the weight of their scrutiny. He was an outsider, a reckless element they feared would bring the entire structure crashing down. Standing near the great tree, presiding over the gathering, was the woman Lyra called Mother Riona. She was old, her hair a cascade of silver, and her face a roadmap of hard-won experience. She wore the dark robes of a high-ranking mage, and in her hand rested a tall staff topped with a softly burning amber orb. She did not look at Kaelen with suspicion, but with a deep, unsettling sadness, as if she already knew his ultimate fate. "Lyra, you take risks," Riona's voice was like dry leaves rustling, ancient but firm. "You bring a known target into our sanctuary. A bright light that attracts the darkness." "Mother Riona," Lyra countered, stepping forward but glancing back at Kaelen to ensure he maintained silence. "Kaelen is more than a target. He has the ether blade, and his personal quest aligns with the core weakness of Seraphina. He seeks the girl with the Sunforger's mark, Elara. The one Seraphina used to anchor Castle Noctis." The name Elara and the mention of the anchor caused a ripple of distress among the assembled vanguard. Riona's eyes, a faded blue that seemed to hold centuries of memory, finally settled on Kaelen. "Kaelen," Riona said, using his name like a diagnosis. "You are an instrument of defiance, a storm that has stirred the waters. But we are fishermen, not sailors. We rely on patience and knowledge. Tell me about the blade and tell me about the mark." Kaelen knew this was his interview, his only chance to gain their trust and access to their intelligence. He spoke concisely, without the bravado he had used against Valerius, detailing his family's bloodline, the ancient nature of the sword, and the painful truth about Elara's birthmark and her abduction. If she is the anchor, Kaelen finished, his voice raw, then cutting her free will either save her, or break the castle and Seraphina's power, even if it kills her. That is a choice I have to make, but I need access. A massive, bearded warrior, a dwarf named Borin who stood near a forge, slammed his fist onto a nearby table. Sacrifice the girl? We don't trade lives, mortal. We save them. We are better than the vampire empress. We are survivors, Riona corrected Borin softly, her gaze still fixed on Kaelen. And sometimes, survival requires the darkest choice. The empress is not fueled by just any magic. She is drawing on a nexus of dark energies bound by a Sunforger's bloodline. To cut that tether, it will require a specific kind of magic, a counterspell woven into the ether itself. Riona rose slowly, leaning heavily on her staff, and began to circle Kaelen, her eyes scrutinizing the hilt of his sword. The ether blade is a vessel. A magnificent one. But it is only fire. To put out a great conflagration, Kaelen, you need more than simple fire. You need knowledge. Lyra was right to bring you. You are the key. You have the weapon and you have the motive. She stopped directly in front of him, the amber orb on her staff humming faintly. But you will not go to Noctis alone. You will be observed, you will be guided, and you will follow the command structure of the Sunstone Vanguard. We cannot afford another reckless display. If you agree to fight with us, not for yourself, then we will use every resource we have to find Elara's binding point and prepare the counter-magic needed to sever it. If you choose to remain the lone wolf, you leave now and we part ways, but you will never breach the castle wards. Kaelen looked at Lyra, who gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. He needed to get to Elara. His solo path had gotten him noticed, but the Vanguard offered a route past the impenetrable walls. I agree, Kaelen stated clearly, resting his hand on the sheath of his ether blade. My sister comes first, but her freedom means Seraphina's end. I will follow your plan, Mother Riona. Tell me what I need to do. Mother Riona finally permitted a slight smile, a grim acknowledgement of the dangerous path ahead. Then the war moves from the shadows to the blade, Kaelen. Our task begins now. We must find the specific ritual Seraphina used to bind the Sunforger's mark, and for that, we need to gather old texts from the deepest, most dangerous archives. She looked at Lyra. Lyra, you will guide Kaelen. Your combined knowledge and his blade are our best chance. Your first mission is to retrieve the chronicles of the Crimson Binding from the ruined crypt of the Silent Scribes. The gathering of the Vanguard began to move, the initial suspicion replaced by a focused, renewed determination. Kaelen felt the weight of their combined hope settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just running from Seraphina. He was now moving with purpose towards her, with a shadow army at his back, and the life of his sister the deadly prize. The crypt of the Silent Scribes lay 3 days' journey to the west, an ancient library carved into a hillside, now partially collapsed and reclaimed by the wilderness. Its former purpose was to safeguard historical and magical knowledge, a purpose that had made it a priority target for Seraphina's initial purge of history. Lyra had described it as a labyrinth of trapped tunnels and unstable magic, a place where the dead were less of a threat than the surviving, corrupted enchantments. Kaelen and Lyra traveled light and fast. Their journey through the fringes of the Whisperwood was a continuous lesson in caution for Kaelen. Lyra taught him to read the subtle signs of the Dark Legion's patrols, the specific breakage of a branch, the pattern of moss growth disturbed by a heavy armored foot, the faintest sulfur scent left by a passing ghoulish scout. She was a master of evasion, and Kaelen, the warrior of grand gestures, found himself learning to appreciate the deadly art of stealth. Their uneasy alliance began to solidify under the pressure of shared danger. Lyra, initially so skeptical, began to see past Kaelen's arrogance to the deep-seated resolve fueled by his love for his sister. Kaelen, in turn, recognized Lyra's tactical brilliance and her genuine dedication to the greater cause, a dedication that had forced her to make heartbreaking compromises for years. The crypt is guarded not by soldiers, but by a lingering curse, Lyra explained as they finally reached the base of the hill, the crypt entrance a gaping maw of black stone and twisted ironwork. The air here was heavy and stagnant. The vampires couldn't penetrate the inner vault, so they sealed the outer levels with their own dark magic, mixing it with the original protective wards. The goal is to scare away knowledge seekers, not to kill them quickly. It's meant to drive you mad. I am already mad if I challenge the Empress, Kaelen responded dryly, checking the latch on his ether blade. What are we expecting? Expect illusions, sound distortion, and traps that exploit your deepest fears, Lyra warned. My role is to hold the wards at bay just long enough for you to find the central vault. The text we seek, the Chronicles of the Crimson Binding, will be in the deepest chamber, protected by the strongest magical lock. They entered the crypt. The first sensation was the cold, a supernatural, bone-aching chill that seemed to suppress sound and sight. The air immediately began to play tricks. Kaelen saw his sister Elara, standing just down the corridor, pale and weeping, calling his name. He instinctively lunged forward, but Lyra grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Illusion. Focus, Kaelen," she hissed, her voice cutting through the hypnotic vision. The illusion dissolved instantly, revealing a jagged pit where Elara had stood. Kaelen felt a surge of cold shame at his lack of control. He was an emotional fool in a place that demanded absolute rationality. "The curse preys on your desires," Lyra instructed, her own face set in a grim mask of concentration. "Think only of the goal. The book. Nothing else." Deeper within the crypt, the illusions became more complex and harder to shake. The stone corridor twisted unexpectedly, the floor seemed to ripple like water. Kaelen saw shadows of the Dark Legion everywhere, heard the phantom roar of Valerius's troops just around the corner, forcing him to keep his hand close to his sword hilt. He fought the urge to ignite the ether, knowing the flash of light would only exacerbate the disorientation. Lyra, however, seemed to flourish in the chaotic magic. She wasn't fighting the illusions, she was reading the structure of the underlying enchantments. Her mage light pulsed with a soft counter-rhythm, gently guiding them past tripped seals and disguised sinkholes. They reached a massive circular chamber. The ceiling had partially collapsed, revealing a faint, poisonous green light that illuminated the central feature. A circular door made of solid, ancient iron, intricately sealed with 5 distinct magical sigils. "The vault," Lyra breathed, moving to the edge of the circular room and sinking onto her knees. "This is where I hold the line. The seals are complex. They are designed to repel any magical tampering by vampiric power. But the counterspell required to open them is still immense. I need uninterrupted focus. Kaelen, I need you to stand guard. Do not let anything interrupt me. Anything." Kaelen took his place at the entrance of the chamber, his hand finally reaching for the hilt of his sword. He could feel the latent power of the ether humming under his fingertips, a loyal, destructive energy waiting to be unleashed. Lyra began her work, drawing complex, shimmering runes in the air with her fingertip. The 5 sigils on the door began to glow faintly, reacting to her magic. Her breathing became shallow and strained, the effort of weaving the counterspell clearly immense. It was then the true danger arrived. Not from the door, but from the shadows of the entrance they had just passed through. The crypt's curse, having failed with illusions, deployed its final desperate defense: corrupted sentinels. 3 figures shambled out of the darkness, their movements unnaturally jerky. They were not ghouls, but the reanimated skeletons of the silent scribes themselves, now animated by the foul magic of Seraphina's curse. They were frail, but their eyes burned with malevolent light, and in their hands they wielded corrupted staves that crackled with dark energy. "The last line of defense," Kaelen muttered, pulling his ether blade free. He didn't ignite it fully, he allowed only a faint, constant blue pulse to run along the edge, enough to pierce the dark magic without disrupting Lyra's delicate weaving. The first scribe sentinel lunged, its staff aiming for Kaelen's head. Kaelen sidestepped the slow, obvious attack and slammed the flat of his blade into the sentinel's ribcage. The ancient bone shattered with a dusty crack, and the creature stumbled. The other 2 were smarter, moving to flank him. Their goal wasn't to kill him, it was to reach Lyra and break her concentration. "Kaelen, faster. The wards are weakening." Lyra cried out, sweat beading on her forehead as the circular door's sigils pulsed erratically. Kaelen knew he couldn't play defensively. He had to be decisive. He let the ether surge, the electric blue light flaring bright, momentarily turning the gloom of the chamber into a shocking ethereal blue. He met the 2nd and 3rd sentinels head-on. The corrupted wood of their staves met the ether blade with a screeching sound. Unlike the vampire armor, the magic-infused wood did not vaporize. It splintered and burned, the dark energy within recoiling violently from the pure ether. Kaelen sliced through one stave and then, without pause, drove his blade through the center of the 3rd sentinel's chest cavity, the blue energy momentarily turning the skeletal remains into a flash of incandescent light before it collapsed into dust. He turned just in time to see the 1st sentinel, having recovered, lunge past him towards Lyra. "No!" Kaelen roared, throwing the now flaring ether blade like a spear. The blade hit the sentinel squarely in the back. There was a sound like dry kindling catching fire, and the final defender burst into a column of searing blue light and smoke, collapsing into a heap of useless bones just feet from the kneeling Lyra. Kaelen rushed to retrieve his sword, his body heaving from the expenditure of energy, his heart pounding. The scent of ozone and burnt magic filled the air. "You said, no more ether displays," Lyra gasped without turning, her focus still on the door. "You needed a distraction," Kaelen countered, retrieving the blade, which was now pulsing with a furious blue. "The doors are open," Lyra announced triumphantly. The 5 magical sigils on the iron door vanished, and the heavy door slowly, gratingly swung inward, revealing a small, dark inner chamber. "I'm spent, Kaelen. It's up to you now. Find the chronicles." Kaelen, exhausted but driven by a singular purpose, stepped past Lyra into the inner vault. The chamber was surprisingly small, lined with stone shelves containing scrolls and heavy leather-bound books. In the center, on a raised stone pedestal, rested a single massive book. Its cover was bound in dried, blackened leather, and its pages were secured by a clasp made of blood-red iron. This had to be it. He reached out and carefully lifted the book. It was heavy, radiating a subtle, uncomfortable chill, and he felt a brief, dark pulse of ancient magic when his fingers touched the cover. The title, embossed in an archaic language, confirmed it: Chronicles of the Crimson Binding. He tucked the book securely inside his tunic, the chilling weight a constant reminder of the horrific knowledge it contained. "I have it," Kaelen whispered, returning to Lyra. "Then we run," she said, rising unsteadily. "My magic is almost gone. We need to be back in the Whisperwood before Valerius realizes the crypt was breached." They retraced their steps, the journey out almost harder than the journey in, as Lyra's exhaustion forced Kaelen to rely almost entirely on his intuition to avoid the remaining traps. They finally emerged from the mouth of the crypt into the fading afternoon light, the heavy book safe, the first critical piece of information secured. As they slipped back into the cover of the wilderness, Kaelen knew they had won a minor but vital victory. The lone warrior had succeeded in his first mission with the resistance, gaining both the necessary intelligence and a deeper, more necessary trust with his skeptical ally. Now they had the knowledge of how Seraphina had bound Elara. Their next task would be to understand the precise countermagic needed to set her free. The true darkness of Seraphina's plan was now literally in Kaelen's hands. The return journey to the Whisperwood was fraught with tension, not from pursuit, though Valerius's patrols were noticeably increased, but from the oppressive weight of the book Kaelen carried. The Chronicles of the Crimson Binding felt cold against his skin, a repository of dark knowledge that now linked the fate of his sister to the potential fall of an empire. When they finally staggered back into the hidden clearing, the Sunstone Vanguard cell was already on high alert. Mother Riona met them at the entrance, her expression grim but expectant. She immediately took in Lyra's strained appearance and Kaelen's exhaustion, but her eyes were drawn only to the book clutched in his hands. "You succeeded," Riona stated, the relief barely masking her fear. "Bring it to the center table. Lyra, you rest. Kaelen, you stay. We must uncover the method of the binding immediately." Kaelen placed the massive, centuries-old tome on the rough-hewn wooden table at the base of the great, rune-carved tree. The air in the clearing seemed to shift, the gentle, protective magic of the Whisperwood momentarily recoiling from the book's corrupting presence. Mother Riona, flanked by several other high-ranking mages, carefully undid the blood-red iron clasp. The pages, brittle and yellowed, were covered in tiny, swirling script and unsettling visceral illustrations. The mages immediately began translating, murmuring in a low, intense dialect, comparing the text to their own limited records. Kaelen stood nearby, watching the slow, agonizing process, the silence broken only by the crackle of the nearby fire and the turning of the ancient pages. After what felt like an eternity, Mother Riona finally slammed her hand down on the page, the sound echoing sharply through the quiet clearing. Her face was pale, her usual composure fractured by deep shock. "It is worse than we feared," Riona whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The binding is not merely an anchor for the castle walls, Kaelen. It is the core of Seraphina's very power over this region. The ritual is called the Heart-Root Convergence." She pointed to an intricate diagram on the page, showing a figure with a stylized sun on their wrist, entangled in a web of dark, pulsing lines that led directly to a grotesque, beating heart symbol. The binding required the unique life force of a sun forger with the mark. "Elara," Riona explained, her words slow and deliberate. "Seraphina did not just take her life force, she merged it with the corrupted essence of the land beneath Castle Noctis. Elara's spirit is not merely chained to the castle, her emotions and her will are being magically amplified and broadcast across the entire region." Kaelen felt a cold, sharp dread. "Amplified? What does that mean?" "It means," Riona continued, her voice heavy with sorrow, "that the constant, pervasive fear, the despair, the overwhelming sense of hopelessness that cripples every human settlement within 50 miles of Noctis, is not a natural reaction to Seraphina's rule. It is a carefully orchestrated, magical sickness. It is Elara's fear and her despair being magnified 1,000-fold and projected by Seraphina's magic. Elara is the source of the Dark Reign's psychic oppression. The realization hit Kaelen like a physical blow. His sister wasn't just suffering in a cell. Her suffering was the weapon, the invisible cage that kept the entire population paralyzed and unable to rise up. He had been fighting an army, but the true enemy was his sister's amplified terror. And the counterspell? Kaelen managed to ask, his voice hoarse. How do we break the convergence? Riona turned to a younger mage who had been translating a specific section of the text. The mage, a nervous woman named Kaelen, cleared her throat. The chronicles state the binding can only be severed by a direct, focused countersurge of pure, opposing energy, Kaelen read aloud. That surge must be channeled through a medium that shares the Sunforger's bloodline, and it must be delivered precisely at the moment and location of the binding nexus, the very center of Seraphina's inner sanctum. Riona looked pointedly at Kaelen's sheathed sword. The Aether blade, Kaelen. Your weapon is pure, raw energy, the opposite of the dark magic that feeds the convergence. And you, the Sunforger's descendant, are the only one who can channel it correctly. The blade must be overloaded, pushed beyond its natural limit, to create a surge powerful enough to shatter the Heart-Root. And if it shatters? Kaelen asked, his heart heavy. Riona sighed, looking down at the terrible diagram. If the Heart-Root shatters, the psychic oppression ends instantly. The Dark Legion will be momentarily stunned by the loss of their primary energy source, and Castle Noctis's wards will collapse entirely. It would be the moment we need to launch a full-scale attack. But the text also warns that the catastrophic release of energy is almost certain to take the life of the anchor. Kaelen closed his eyes, the image of his sister's face warring with the image of a terrified, oppressed world. He had come here to save his sister, but now, saving his sister meant condemning the rest of the world to the continuous terror of Seraphina's reign. And saving the world meant deliberately killing the only family he had left. The true weight of the hero's burden settled on him. Lyra, who had been listening from the edge of the clearing, walked over and placed a steady hand on Kaelen's shoulder. We find a way to save both, she said quietly. The text is ancient. It assumes a purely physical severance. Maybe there is a spell, an addition, a sacrifice that can cushion the blow to Elara's spirit. We will search every page of the chronicles for that answer, Riona promised, her voice regaining its strength. But time is against us. Seraphina is already hunting you, Kaelen. She knows her defenses are flawed. Our next move must be swift and absolute. Riona gathered the mages and strategists. The Castle Noctis inner sanctum is our target. We need a detailed map of the subterranean levels where the binding nexus would be located. Valerius's obsession with security means those plans will be locked away. And there is only one place where such sensitive blueprints would be kept. The Royal Archives and Mapping Chamber located deep within the military barracks surrounding the castle. She looked at Kaelen and Lyra. Kaelen, you have the weapon. Lyra, you have the stealth and the knowledge of the terrain. Your next mission is the most dangerous yet. You must infiltrate the barracks, retrieve the architectural plans for the inner sanctum, and bring them back here. We will use that time to find the safety spell for Elara. Go. And be shadows, not heroes. Kaelen nodded, the Aether blade feeling heavy and charged even in its sheath. He looked at Lyra, a new, shared grim determination replacing their earlier friction. Their objective was clear, their risk was existential, and the path forward was soaked in the terrible, necessary compromise. He had to trust that the Vanguard could find the spell to save his sister's life while he retrieved the map to end Seraphina's reign. The Royal Archives and Mapping Chamber was not located within Castle Noctis itself, but was a heavily fortified annex built directly into the perimeter wall of the main Dark Legion barracks. It was a sprawling complex of grim, black stone, surrounded by towering, armored watchtowers and patrolled constantly by the elite of Valerius's forces. This mission required not just stealth, but precision that felt foreign to Kaelen's warrior nature. Kaelen and Lyra approached the barracks under the cover of a thick, unnatural fog that often rolled down from the foothills surrounding Noctis. Lyra, relying on obscure weather lore and minor air manipulation spells, had predicted the fog would be their only shield. They moved on foot, having spent 2 days studying the patrol routes from a distance, memorizing the rhythm of the changing shifts and the blind spots of the magical sensors that lined the walls. The sensor array doesn't detect organic life. It detects rapid temperature shifts and concentrated magical energy, Lyra whispered as they lay prone behind a crumbling stone fence overlooking the main gate. Your ether blade is the biggest risk. Keep it cold, Kaelen. Don't even let your focus touch it. Understood, Kaelen replied, his gaze fixed on the tallest watchtower, manned by a vampire guard whose posture indicated intense, perhaps bored vigilance. He was used to the tension of direct combat, but the slow, agonizing crawl of infiltration was far more taxing on his nerves. Their entry point was an old, poorly maintained sewer conduit Lyra had discovered on a discarded maintenance schematic recovered by the Vanguard years prior. It ran beneath the main courtyard and terminated near the archive's foundations. The descent was foul, the air thick with sewage and the metallic scent of damp vampire waste. They crawled for nearly an hour, the sound of their movement magnified in the enclosed space. Kaelen kept his body low, his mind rigidly focused on Elara's face, using that pain to suppress the impulse for rash action. Finally, Lyra signaled a stop. She used a small, silent cutting tool to etch a precise shape into the masonry of the ceiling above them. A quick, contained pulse of her light magic dissolved the mortar, and a slab of stone dropped silently onto the silt below. We are directly beneath the mapping chamber, Lyra whispered, pulling herself up through the opening first. Kaelen followed, emerging into a small, dust-choked maintenance crawlspace. The chamber itself was separated from the crawlspace by a thin, old wooden floor. Lyra carefully placed a small, silver listening horn against the wood. I hear only the librarian, a low-ranking vampire named Marius. He's slow and obsessive, the perfect kind of keeper for critical data. He won't patrol. But the door is magically sealed. The magical seal was the real danger. Any heavy-handed attempt to breach it would trigger alarms that would bring Valerius and his entire company down on them within minutes. Lyra took out a vial containing a thick, dark liquid, a concentrated extract of whisperwood sap, and applied it delicately to the crack beneath the door. This temporarily confuses the low-level magical signature of the locking spell. We have 60 seconds once I begin. She began to trace an intricate rune pattern on the wooden floor with her finger, the movements delicate and swift. As the sap seeped into the crack, she chanted a silent, internal spell, her face contorted in intense concentration. The lock on the chamber door gave a faint, almost inaudible click. Go. Lyra breathed, collapsing backward, already exhausted from the magical effort. Marius is inside. Neutralize him silently. Find the vault plans. They should be a large, rolled parchment, stamped with the crimson eye sigil. Kaelen slipped through the door, his movements fluid and noiseless. The mapping chamber was a vast, cold room, lit by soft, glowing orbs of captured witchlight. The air was dry and smelled of old parchment and dust. Tables were covered in large, rolled maps of the territory, charting troop movements and resource stockpiles. In the center, sitting hunched over a desk, was the librarian Marius. He was pale, thin, and entirely absorbed in marking a chart with a fine-tipped quill. Kaelen moved behind him, his boots utterly silent on the stone floor. He could not use the ether blade. The light and residual energy would alert every magical sensor in the barracks. Instead, he pulled the silver-hilted dagger Lyra had initially pointed at him. It was silent, effective, and free of magical signature. Marius never saw him. Kaelen clamped his hand over the vampire's mouth and, with a swift, decisive thrust, drove the silver dagger deep into the vampire's heart. The vampire stiffened, a choked gurgle escaping the grasp of Kaelen's hand, before his body went slack. Kaelen eased him onto the floor, minimizing the sound. The dagger remained in the body, a necessary sacrifice. He scanned the room quickly. The place was a maze of information, but Kaelen remembered Riona's instruction: look for the crimson eye sigil. He saw it, a single large rolled parchment sitting atop a high display easel, secured by a heavy, obsidian weight. It was stamped repeatedly with the unique, bloody sigil of Seraphina's personal guard, the ultimate sign of secrecy. Kaelen moved to the easel, carefully lifting the heavy weight. As he did, his elbow brushed against a small ornate clock on the nearby desk. The clock tipped, falling against the floor with a loud, unmistakable clatter. The sound was deafening in the silence of the chamber. Kaelen froze. Outside, the regular marching cadence of a patrol immediately stopped. A voice, heavy and guttural, yelled, "What was that?" "Check the archives." They heard it. Lyra's strained whisper came from the crack in the floor. "The patrol is coming to the door. You have seconds." Kaelen didn't hesitate. He grabbed the parchment, rolling it tightly, and shoved it inside his tunic. He had to cover his exit. He knew he couldn't fight a full patrol with the ether blade silent, and he couldn't leave the bodies or the sound of the clock unchecked. Thinking quickly, Kaelen snatched a bottle of burning oil from a nearby stand, used for lighting torches, and tossed it onto the largest central map table, scattering maps and spilling ink. Then he smashed the witchlight orbs, plunging the room into chaotic, total darkness. He dashed back to the hole in the floor. Lyra now. Lyra, recovering quickly, had already used her meager reserves to prepare a hasty dispersal spell. As Kaelen dropped back into the sewer conduit, the outside door to the archives was being violently kicked inward. Fire. The archives are compromised. A vampire soldier shouted, his voice echoing in the chamber. Lyra dropped the remaining piece of masonry back into place, sealing the opening above them, and then unleashed her spell. It wasn't an attack but a complex deflection. A wave of sound magic surged outward, mimicking the screech of a wounded ghoul and the crackle of fire, creating utter confusion in the room above. Run, Kaelen. Now. Lyra pushed him forward. They crawled back through the conduit, the sounds of shouting, crashing furniture, and the smell of smoke and burning parchment intensifying above them. They had created chaos, a believable scenario of a panicked thief trying to destroy evidence before escaping. It would buy them hours. As they finally emerged back into the night air far from the barracks, gasping and covered in filth, Kaelen pulled the rolled parchment from his tunic. It was slightly damp but intact, the crimson eye sigil staring back at him. We got it, Kaelen wheezed, leaning against the damp rock wall, his body shivering from the adrenaline crash. We got it, Lyra confirmed, equally breathless, yet a ghost of triumph in her eyes. And we left Valerius a perfectly chaotic scene to investigate. He'll assume we were searching for troop movements, not his castle blueprints. She then looked at the scroll. Now we have the map. We know where Elara is bound. We just need to find the counterspell in the chronicles. Kaelen held the heavy scroll, his mind racing. The plan was coming together. They had the weapon, the motivation, the location, and the ally. The next move was the final, irreversible one, the infiltration of Castle Noctis itself. The lone stand had evolved into a calculated war, and the next time the Empress saw him, it would be within her own walls. Kaelen and Lyra returned to the Whisperwood camp, the stolen blueprints tightly clutched, their exhaustion overridden by the urgency of the new phase. The entire Sunstone Vanguard cell mobilized around the objective. Kaelen unfurled the massive parchment on the central table. It was a masterpiece of dwarven engineering corrupted by vampire necessity, detailed schematics of Castle Noctis, focusing on the hidden subterranean infrastructure. Mother Riona and the core strategists immediately began to pore over the plans, comparing them to the cryptic descriptions in the chronicles of the Crimson Binding. The architectural drawings showed not just rooms, but the complex system of magical conduits and energy flows that permeated the castle's foundations. The binding nexus. It must be this central confluence, Mother Riona declared, her finger tracing a junction point deep beneath the castle's ancient dungeon levels. The schematic showed a massive, reinforced chamber labeled with a series of protective sigils far more complex than any encountered so far. The nexus is sealed by a triple-layer ward, physical, magical, and psychic. It is the heart of Seraphina's reign. The plans revealed that the nexus chamber was directly accessible through the castle's old, forgotten armory, which was in turn linked to the main sewer system, a path too small for the Dark Legion's armored patrols, but perfect for 2 infiltrators. We have a clear path of entry, Lyra confirmed, marking the route with charcoal on the parchment. Through the old sewer conduit into the armory sublevel, and then a straight path to the nexus. It's the only way to avoid the main military garrisons and the Empress's personal guard. While the strategists finalized the route, the mages, led by the young Kaelen, worked tirelessly on the chronicles. They were racing against Kaelen's infiltration timeline, desperately searching for the cushioning spell that could spare Elara's life when the Heart-Root Convergence shattered. Kaelen meanwhile dedicated himself to his weapon. He knew the Aether blade had to be overloaded beyond anything he'd attempted before. He spent hours in a secluded part of the woods, channeling raw ether into the blade, pushing his mind and body to the brink of collapse. The blade glowed a fierce, incandescent white-blue, humming with volatile energy that scorched the very air around it. He was conditioning himself and the weapon for the final, catastrophic search. One evening, Lyra found him sitting alone, the sword inert in his hands, his face drawn with fatigue. "The mages haven't found it," Lyra said quietly, sitting beside him. The text is silent on a secondary measure. The countersurge is described as an all-or-nothing blow. Kaelen looked out into the darkness. "Then the world lives and I lose my last tie to it." He spoke the words without emotion, having wrestled with the decision for days. The weight of the world had won over the instinct for personal salvation. "There is another possibility," Lyra said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The chronicles mention the Sunforger's line also possesses a unique, final resource. A life-forged bond. A sacrifice not of the victim but of the agent." She turned to him, her eyes intense. "When the binding is shattered, the massive energy recoil needs a host. If you can channel the ether not just through the blade, but through yourself, you could redirect the bulk of the damaging energy into your own spirit. It would almost certainly kill you, Kaelen, but it could spare Elara, allowing her spirit to be safely released when the convergence dies." The silence that followed was absolute. Kaelen wasn't surprised. He knew his destiny was tied to this weapon and this cause. "A soul sacrifice," Kaelen finally acknowledged, his voice barely a breath. "The ultimate, direct counter-surge." "It's a suicide mission," Kaelen, Lyra insisted, placing her hand on his, a sudden, fierce protectiveness in her touch. "Riona would never order it. But you need to know it's the only way the text suggests to save your sister." "It is the only way I will accept," Kaelen confirmed, his gaze resolute. "The Empress wanted a reckless hero. She will get one. But this time it will be by my choice." Over the next few days, Kaelen and Lyra refined their infiltration plan, discussing contingencies and escape routes that Kaelen knew he wouldn't use. Lyra taught him the specific hand signals for silently neutralizing guards and the subtle magical tricks to bypass low-level observation charms. The pragmatic resistance fighter and the desperate warrior were now a cohesive unit, bound by the terrible plan. "We move tonight," Mother Riona announced at the final council, the chronicles closed and secured. The night of the twin moons, a time when Seraphina's personal magic is slightly diverted by a court ritual. "It is our only window." Riona approached Kaelen, her ancient eyes filled with respect and sorrow. "You go with the blessings of the Sunstone Vanguard. May the ether keep you cold and your heart stay warm." Lyra stood ready, equipped with infiltration tools, a healing kit, and her own small, deadly weapons. She looked at Kaelen, her eyes reflecting the unspoken knowledge of his ultimate sacrifice. "No matter what happens in there," she said, her voice steady, "don't look back. Don't hesitate. We will be waiting for the signal, the collapse of the castle wards. When that happens, the Vanguard will attack, giving you the cover you need." Kaelen nodded, strapping the ether blade securely to his back. He didn't say goodbye, just met her gaze with fierce resolve. He was no longer the lone warrior of the town square. He was an assassin, an executioner, and a savior, bound for his own death. The time for grand gestures was over. Now only the final, silent act remained. Their path led straight into the dark, festering heart of Seraphina's power. The night of the twin moons cast a strange, double-shadowed light over the land surrounding Castle Noctis, perfect cover for two people who wished to be forgotten. The air was cold and still, the silence around the massive, black structure oppressive. Kaelen and Lyra found the ancient sewer conduit exactly where the plans indicated, hidden beneath a cluster of jagged volcanic rocks far from the main road. The entrance was secured by a heavy, rusted grate. Lyra used a combination of specialized oil and a minor corrosion spell to silently remove the grate, and they descended into the cold, stinking depths. The crawl through the main sewer line was long and nauseating, but the plans proved accurate. After an hour of navigating tight, flooded passages, they reached the intersection leading to the castle's ancient armory sublevel. Lyra confirmed the surrounding magic signatures were stable, focused entirely on the outer perimeter. Seraphina's confidence in her wards was their greatest asset. Lyra used a final, intense concentration spell to bypass the internal pressure seal of the armory entrance, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The seal is off. We have perhaps 15 minutes before the magical integrity check cycles and detects the breach," she warned. They stepped out of the sewer and into the cold, dusty air of the sublevel. The armory was a vast, circular chamber lined with centuries of discarded weapons and forgotten armor. A single narrow door stood open on the far side, the path to the Nexus. "The plans showed a guard rotation here," Kaelen whispered, adjusting the ether blade on his back. "No, wait," Lyra replied, her eyes narrowing. "The air is too clean. The dust is undisturbed. Someone knows we are coming." A heavy, low voice cut through the silence, resonating from the shadows of the chamber. "The arrogance of the solitary mortal is matched only by the foolishness of his friends." Lord Valerius, General of the Dark Legion, stepped out from behind a towering stack of black shields. He was alone, but his presence filled the chamber. He wore his heavy, obsidian armor, and his face, visible through his lifted helmet, was a mask of cold fury and satisfied anticipation. "Kaelen," Valerius sneered, drawing his massive two-handed sword, the metal dark and rune-etched. Your pathetic little show at the gates required me to execute 3 captains for failing to capture you. I assure you my Empress's curiosity is satisfied and my debt is due. I have waited here in the cold, knowing your path would lead you straight to the heart of what you seek. I will not have my hunt interrupted by your mousy resistance friends. Valerius, Kaelen returned, drawing his ether blade. The pure energy immediately awoke, a fierce, humming blue light cutting through the gloom. I'm not here for you. Step aside. Step aside? Valerius laughed, a harsh, grating sound. This chamber is mine. And the Empress's anchor is guarded by my very life. You will not pass. He gestured toward the door leading to the Nexus. But go ahead, mortal. Rush toward your sister. She is not a prisoner, you fool. She is a foundation. A battery. Her constant, crushing despair is what keeps this kingdom paralyzed. You shatter the foundation, you kill her, and you die broken. I win either way. Lyra stepped forward, raising her hands, readying a deflection spell. Kaelen, he's buying time for reinforcements. We fight together. No, Kaelen commanded, pushing her back toward the sewer entrance. This is my debt. You are the Vanguard's hope. You have the plans. If I fail, you must escape, you must tell Riona. Go. Now. Valerius lunged, his great sword aimed not at Kaelen but at Lyra. Kaelen moved faster, intercepting the blow with a clash of metal and magic that sent a painful, deafening shriek through the armory. Valerius's obsidian blade absorbed the shock, but the ether scorched the metal where it met, leaving a glowing seam. Lyra, knowing Kaelen's sacrifice was already decided, obeyed. She vanished back into the shadows of the sewer entrance, sealing the hole as quietly as she could. Kaelen was truly alone. The duel was brutal, a clash of speed versus raw power. Valerius was a master swordsman of centuries, every swing calculated to crush bone and metal. Kaelen was faster, leveraging the volatility of the ether. He didn't just parry, he used the blade's energy to disrupt Valerius's balance, forcing the massive general off his rhythm. Kaelen pressed the attack, driving the ether blade deeper into the weaknesses of Valerius's armor. The blue energy exploded against the seams, searing the vampire flesh beneath. Valerius roared in pain, a genuine, anguished sound. This is impossible. Valerius snarled, momentarily backing away, nursing a scorched shoulder. That weapon is an abomination. It's justice, Kaelen corrected, channeling the raw fury of his wasted years into the sword. He knew he was running out of time and energy. He had to end this now. With a final, desperate surge, Kaelen ignited the ether to its maximum capacity. The blade flared into an agonizing near-white light, its hum rising to a shriek. Kaelen leaped, spinning under a slow, sweeping attack from Valerius, and drove the ether blade upwards, straight through the joints of the general's chest plate. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. The pure, chaotic ether overloaded the vampire's ancient core. Valerius stiffened, his eyes widening in a final moment of horrified realization. He did not vaporize. He crystallized, his obsidian armor and the vampire beneath fusing into a statue of dark, smoking glass. With a heavy, echoing crash, Lord Valerius shattered onto the cold stone floor, reduced to shards of dead matter. Kaelen retrieved his sword, the blade glowing intensely, and stumbled to the Nexus door. The path was open. He took a single, ragged breath and pushed the heavy door inward, stepping into the final chamber. The Nexus chamber was circular and immense, a cavern of pulsating, dark energy. In the center, suspended above a swirling pool of black ichor, was a crystalline cage. And within that cage, floating pale and ethereal, was Elara. She was older now, but her eyes, wide and terrified, were unmistakably hers. The stylized sun mark on her wrist was not a birthmark. It was glowing with a sickly, corrupting red light, fueling the chamber. She was weeping silently, and Kaelen felt the wave of crushing despair, her amplified fear, wash over him, almost bringing him to his knees. He fought through the psychic attack, his resolve a shield against the pain. And then she appeared. Empress Seraphina materialized on the opposite side of the Nexus, her crimson eyes fixed on Kaelen, not with fury but with profound, almost philosophical disappointment. You have shattered my general, Seraphina's voice was melodic yet chilling. And now you stand before my deepest secret. I knew you would come, mortal. That brief spark of ether, that reckless defiance, it was charming if naive. Did you truly think you could save her? I am here to free her, Kaelen stated, raising the ether blade. You cannot, Seraphina dismissed him with a gesture of her hand. The Heart-Root Convergence is complete. Her pain is my strength, her fear is my shield. If you shatter the nexus with your weapon, the subsequent spiritual recoil will obliterate her existence. You kill her to save the world, Kaelen. Is that the heroic choice you came here to make? Kaelen looked from the terrified face of his sister to the serene, confident face of the Empress. He knew the answer. I will free both of them, Kaelen declared, channeling the last of his strength. He thrust the ether blade into the stone floor, not toward the nexus but downward. The pure ether energy screamed as it was forced not into the crystal cage, but into the network of magical conduits beneath the floor. Kaelen closed his eyes, remembering Lyra's whispered words, Riona's grim lore. He didn't just channel the ether, he channeled the ether through himself, accepting the volatile energy into his own spirit. I am the descendant, he roared, his voice breaking as the pure energy ripped through his mortal form, binding the countersurge to his very soul. The blade glowed a blinding, unbearable white. The entire chamber began to shake violently. Seraphina's perfect composure finally fractured, her eyes widening in horror as she realized his plan. He wasn't shattering the nexus. He was using himself as a conduit for the explosive, damaging recoil, drawing it into his own soul while delivering the killing blow to the binding. No, that is madness. Seraphina shrieked, a sound of ancient, raw panic. The nexus exploded in a silent, blinding flash of white and black energy. The crystalline cage shattered. The dark magic of the Heart-Root Convergence died instantly, its source violently cut off, and the massive psychic wave of despair that had crippled the lands vanished in a single silent instant. Seraphina screamed as her power drained away, the collapse of her shield hitting her with the force of a physical blow. She clawed at the air, her terrifying form flickering, her connection to the land severed. Kaelen fell to his knees, his entire body alight with the agonizing, purifying white fire of the ether recoil. He looked up, his vision blurring, and saw Elara floating down free, her eyes wide not with terror but with confusion. She was alive. With his last ounce of consciousness, Kaelen forced a faint, triumphant smile. The lone warrior had paid the price. His sacrifice was complete. The Empress was wounded, her castle was collapsing, and the world was free from its psychic chains. Kaelen's body went limp, consumed by the light. Outside, the instantaneous collapse of Castle Noctis's magical wards served as the signal. The Sunstone Vanguard, led by Mother Riona and Lyra, erupted from the Whisperwood, attacking the now confused and directionless Dark Legion. Lyra, seeing the terrifying surge of white light from the core of the castle, knew Kaelen had made the ultimate choice. She fought with renewed, furious resolve, leading the vanguard toward the castle. The dark reign was broken, its foundation shattered, its general dead, and its empress reeling. The world was free, saved by the sheer audacity and ultimate sacrifice of the lone warrior who dared to fight an empress's army, and who had stunned them all. The implosion of the Heart-Root Convergence was not a sound but a sensation, a dizzying vacuum of psychic energy that struck the Dark Legion like a physical hammer blow. The constant, oppressive flow of Elara's amplified despair vanished, replaced by a sudden, confusing clarity that robbed the vampires of their usual predatory focus. Outside Castle Noctis, the colossal black walls began to crack, the powerful magical wards that had protected the fortress for decades dissolving into harmless smoke. This was the signal. Now. Mother Riona's ancient voice rang out, amplified by a powerful spell, echoing across the scarred plains. The Sunstone Vanguard, hidden for years, burst from the tree lines and shadows. They were not an army but a focused, lethal force of warriors, mages and healers, galvanized by Kaelen's sacrifice. Lyra, her face a mask of determined grief, led the advance team, her small body moving with fierce, agile speed toward the compromised walls. The Dark Legion, disoriented and physically weakened by the sudden loss of their magical anchor, struggled to mount a coherent defense. They were no longer fighting a broken, terrified populace, they were fighting seasoned rebels who knew their weaknesses. The Vanguard focused silver-tipped arrows and specialized light magic attacks on the vampire soldiers, exploiting their vulnerability to purity and speed. Lyra's team found their entry point through the crumbling sewer conduit. She didn't hesitate, diving into the foul water, driven by the singular need to reach the Nexus chamber and confirm the fate of Kaelen and Elara. They navigated the armory sublevel, finding the shattering remnants of Lord Valerius, a mountain of dark glass and obsidian shards, a clear testament to the Aether's final power. Lyra felt a surge of grim satisfaction, but it was fleeting. The path was clear but the price was etched in the dust. Lyra burst into the Nexus chamber. The air was thick with the residue of immense, raw magic, the smell of ozone and burning spiritual energy. The chamber was silent, the dark ichor pool now still and glassy. She saw them immediately. Elara was slumped against the shattered remains of the crystal cage, still but breathing. She was alive, unharmed physically, but her eyes were vacant, her spirit temporarily stunned by the severance. Kaelen lay near the center of the room. The ether blade lay inches from his hand, its light extinguished, now just a simple piece of steel, cold and inert. Kaelen's body was whole, but his skin was unnaturally pale, and a faint, shimmering residue of white energy faded from his fingertips. There was no doubt. His soul sacrifice had consumed his life force entirely. Lyra rushed to Elara first, checking her pulse and breath. She's alive, but her mind, it will take time for her to heal, she muttered to the warrior who followed her. Then Lyra moved to Kaelen. She knelt, her healer's instincts overridden by a wave of profound sorrow. She didn't check for a pulse, she knew it was useless. She reached out and gently closed his eyes, her fingers brushing the cold skin of his cheek. The reckless, arrogant hero had fulfilled his purpose, keeping his final, terrible promise to his sister and to the world. She retrieved the ether blade. It was cold, heavier than before and completely inert. Its destiny was fulfilled, its purpose had consumed its master. We have to move, Lyra commanded, fighting back the sting of tears. The Empress. They took Elara, wrapping her in Kaelen's cloak, and began the difficult ascent into the main castle. Meanwhile, Empress Seraphina, severely weakened and enraged, had retreated to her inner sanctum, the ancient throne room atop the highest spire. The loss of the Heart-Root Convergence had not killed her, but it had stripped her of the power that made her invincible. She was an ancient, powerful vampire queen, but now she was just a queen without her crown's anchor, and she was vulnerable. Mother Riona led the main force in securing the outer courtyard and the Great Hall. The Vanguard's goal shifted from infiltration to a decisive hunt. Lyra's team, with Elara secured in the care of a supporting mage, joined the main force in the Great Hall. The hall, usually a sight of opulent, terrifying beauty, was now marred by battle and dust. The Empress is in the throne spire, Riona announced, her staff crackling with protective energy. Her defenses are still strong there. She is wounded but desperate. We cannot allow her to escape and rebuild her power. Lyra stepped forward, placing the inert ether blade on the Vanguard's battle map. Valerius is dead. The Nexus is destroyed. Kaelen bought us this victory with his life. The Empress is weakened, but she is ancient. We need to strike the one thing she values above all else, her immortality. The mages consulted quickly. The chronicles mentioned that the Empress's longevity is tied to the castle's deepest blood wards, which are now partially exposed due to the collapse of the convergence. Kaelen reported, her face smudged with soot. The Vanguard will hold the lower levels and secure the escape routes, Riona declared. Lyra, you know the inner workings of this siege best. You, with Boren and 2 of our best warriors, will ascend the spire. Do not engage her in a direct fight. Find the focus of her remaining blood wards, a hidden conduit likely near the throne, and shatter it. This will make her mortal enough for us to deal with. Lyra nodded, strapping on Kaelen's sheath, leaving the ether blade behind. She took a silver chain whip, a weapon that could bypass traditional vampire defenses, and gave the order. The time for the grand, lone fight was over. Now it was time for the organized, tactical victory. The final hunt for Empress Seraphina had begun. The ascent of the throne spire was not a straightforward climb. It was a desperate, tactical scramble through the collapsing architecture of Seraphina's personal domain. Lyra, accompanied by the dwarf warrior Boren and 2 veteran Vanguard fighters, moved swiftly through the narrow, twisting stairwells, the air growing colder and thinner with altitude. The Empress's remaining loyal guards, her personal blood court, met them at every landing, fighting with the fierce desperation of cornered animals. Boren, fueled by years of resentment against the vampiric tyranny, proved invaluable. His dwarven strength and heavy rune-inscribed hammer smashed through the weakened armor of the blood court, clearing the way. Lyra used her light magic not for defense, but as focused distraction, blinding the vampires just long enough for her companions to land lethal silver blows. As they moved higher, the interior architecture grew grander and more unsettling. The final flight of stairs opened directly into the throne room, a vast, oval chamber with a domed ceiling of smoked glass, offering a view of the blood-red moon that now hung low over the ruined lands. Empress Seraphina was there, not seated on her throne of blackened iron, but standing rigid beside it. She was still a figure of terrifying power, but the perfect composure was gone. Her alabaster skin was marred by a subtle ashy grayness, and her beautiful lunar-white hair seemed dull, Her crimson eyes, usually so calm, burned with cold, ancient fury and desperation. "The children of the shadows," Seraphina hissed, her voice echoing in the chamber, laced with disdain and venom. "You think the death of my general and the destruction of a mere anchor can end me? I am an empress of centuries, fueled by the blood of nations. Your mortal sacrifice bought you only minutes, Lyra. Minutes before I rebuild the Nexus and crush your pathetic rebellion." Lyra stepped forward, shielding her companions. She knew her mage-light and silver whip were no match for Seraphina in a direct fight. Kaelen had bought them the vulnerability, Lyra had to exploit it. "You are cut off, Seraphina," Lyra stated, her voice clear and unwavering despite the terror she felt. "The psychic fear is gone. Your legion is in disarray. Your anchor is dead and the power you stole is spent. You are mortal now, Empress. Just an old vampire with a title." The insult, delivered with such calm authority, struck deeper than any weapon. Seraphina let out a high, terrible shriek of rage. She moved with impossible speed, a blur of dark fabric and deadly intent, aiming directly for Lyra's throat. Lyra was fast, but Seraphina was faster. Before the Empress could reach her, Boren lunged forward, intercepting the attack with a massive swing of his hammer. The dwarf's blow was true and heavy, forcing Seraphina to deflect with a ward that shimmered briefly before shattering. She was thrown back against the iron throne, the impact shaking the entire spire. "The wards are failing," Boren roared, shaking out his arm. "She is weak. Find the conduit." Seraphina recovered instantly, her fangs bared. She raised her hands and the surrounding darkness coalesced, forming sharp, black shards of solidified shadow, which she hurled at the intruders. Lyra knew this was her chance. While Boren and the two Vanguard warriors engaged the Empress, using silver shields and coordinated attacks to keep her focused on defense, Lyra slipped away, her eyes scanning the complex architecture. She looked for the conduit, the specific focal point where the remaining power of the blood wards would be channeled. She remembered the obscure diagrams in the chronicles and the subtle energy flows she'd learned to read from the barracks blueprints. She found it, not in the grand throne but hidden in plain sight. Beneath the smoked glass dome, running along the highest architraves, was a thin, pulsating line of deep crimson light, barely visible against the black stone. It fed directly from the base of the spire and funneled into the center of the dome, the source of Seraphina's residual longevity. Lyra pulled out the silver chain whip, its links forged with sun-blessed silver. It wasn't a powerful weapon, but it was designed to disrupt magical integrity. She channeled a concentrated burst of her own light magic into the whip, sending a wave of burning purity along the metal. She took aim, ignoring the terrifying spectacle of Seraphina battling her comrades, ignoring the agonizing shrieks as the dwarf's hammer landed a glancing blow on the Empress's arm. With a grunt of effort, Lyra swung the whip. The silver chain cracked through the air and struck the crimson conduit line with absolute precision. The effect was instantaneous. The crimson line exploded in a silent burst of dark, corrupted energy. The entire spire structure groaned, and the dome ceiling above them cracked loudly. Seraphina gasped, staggering backward, clutching her head. The grayness on her skin deepened, and her powerful crimson eyes dimmed to a dull, weary red. "You fool," Seraphina whispered, her voice weak, her immortality severed. "You have only destroyed the tower, not me." "We didn't need to destroy the tower," Lyra said, stepping back towards the entrance, the silver whip held ready. "We only needed to make you bleed." Seraphina raised her hand for a final, desperate attack, but the power was gone. She was slow, weakened, and her ancient spirit was momentarily mortal. Just as the Empress moved, a powerful wave of purifying flame burst into the chamber, crashing against the Empress's weakened form. Mother Riona stood in the doorway, her staff raised, radiating the raw, ancient power of the Sunstone Vanguard. "The time for your reign is over, creature," Riona declared, her voice booming. The combined force of the Vanguard's attack, fueled by Riona's massive magical surge and Boren's final relentless charge, was too much for the now mortal vampire Empress. Seraphina, the invincible ruler of centuries, was finally overwhelmed, her dark power extinguished by the relentless forces of light and unity. The siege was over. The Empress was defeated, her body consumed by the cleansing magic of the Sunstone Vanguard. The immediate aftermath was chaotic but victorious. The Dark Legion, leaderless and without their psychic anchor, scattered into the wilderness or surrendered. Castle Noctis, its foundations shattered and its wards broken, began a slow, inevitable process of collapse. Lyra's first act, after ensuring the safety of her team and the defeat of the Empress, was to return to Elara. She found her in a secure room, her eyes open, the vacant stare replaced by a gentle, tearful confusion. "Kaelen?" Elara whispered, the first word she had spoken since her rescue. Lyra knelt, taking the girl's small, fragile hand. She knew the truth was too heavy for Elara's still reeling mind. "He saved you, Elara. He is a hero. The greatest hero." Lyra looked back at the ruined city and the collapsing castle. The sacrifice had been absolute, the victory bittersweet. Kaelen had transformed the solo stand into a coordinated triumph, giving his life not just to break an empire, but to restore hope to a broken world. The Vanguard now faced the immense, terrifying task of ruling the free lands, but they would do so in the light of the sun, forever honoring the lone warrior who dared to challenge the darkness. The weeks following the defeat of Empress Seraphina were characterized by a manic, almost disbelieving energy. Castle Noctis, the symbol of absolute vampiric power, was systematically dismantled by the Sunstone Vanguard. Its obsidian walls were deemed too saturated with dark magic to remain, and its collapse served as a monumental visible statement of freedom across the territories. The Vanguard's first critical action was to establish order, hunting down the last pockets of resistance from the scattering Dark Legion and, more importantly, providing aid to the human populations who were just beginning to realize the psychic oppression had lifted. Mother Riona, now the de facto leader of the newly forming government, focused on diplomacy and reconstruction. Lyra, however, took on the responsibility of healing. She established a temporary medical compound in the foothills, dedicated to treating those who had been most affected by the decades of psychological despair amplified by the Heart-Root Convergence. And at the center of Lyra's focus was Elara. Elara's physical body was unharmed, but her mind was fragile. Her long period as the psychic anchor had left her spirit traumatized, used as a conduit for pure, amplified terror. She was quiet, prone to sudden, unexplained bouts of fear, and refused to be far from Lyra's side. The presence of the Aether blade, now carefully stored, seemed to both draw and frighten her. Lyra used all her skills as a healer and her acquired knowledge from the Chronicles of the Crimson Binding to help Elara. She didn't use powerful magic, which might overwhelm the girl's spirit. Instead, she used calming herbs, meditation, and, most importantly, stories. "Kaelen loved you more than anything," Lyra would tell Elara gently, holding her small, trembling hand. "He was so brave. He fought an entire army just to get the Empress's attention, to make her see him. He told her she couldn't win and he proved it." Elara would listen, her eyes distant. Slowly the fear began to recede, replaced by a deep, quiet sadness. She never asked where Kaelen was, having perhaps subconsciously understood his ultimate fate in the Nexus chamber. Instead, she focused on his bravery, the idea that someone had endured so much for her. One afternoon, several months after the battle, Elara finally asked to see the sword. Lyra brought the Aether blade to her. It was cold, inert steel, yet Elara touched the hilt with a cautious reverence. "It feels empty," Elara whispered, the first statement she had made about her captivity. "But it has good memories now. Not just the pain." Lyra realized then that Kaelen's sacrifice had not only spared Elara's life but had also imprinted the blade with an echo of his own pure Aether-forged love and resolve. The sword, once a conduit for volatile energy, was now a somber memorial. The Sunstone Vanguard transitioned from a resistance cell to the foundation of the new government. They were not perfect, and the challenges of rebuilding a society warped by fear and tyranny were immense. Lord Valerius's former legionaries who had fled still posed a constant threat, and the resources were scarce. Yet the people were free to hope, to organize, and to build. Lyra became one of the key leaders, balancing her healing duties with strategic planning. She championed policies focused on communal well-being and education, ensuring that the knowledge that had brought Seraphina down, the ancient texts, the history of the Sunforgers, and the principles of Aether magic, were openly studied, preventing any future single source of power. The ruins of Castle Noctis were eventually cleared, and in its place the Vanguard built a massive central learning center and a memorial. The memorial was simple, a large, polished stone plinth placed exactly where the Heart-Root Convergence had been. Engraved upon it were the words, "For the Sunforger's mark and the warrior who stood alone." The only other object placed there was the Aether blade, resting on the stone, its inert state a constant reminder of the price of freedom. Years passed. Elara grew older, her spirit healed, but forever marked by the unique trauma of her childhood. She became a quiet, incredibly perceptive young woman, dedicated to assisting Lyra in the healing compound. Though she had never met her brother Kaelen as an adult, she carried his legacy, her inner strength reflecting the boundless resolve he had shown in their final, terrible moments together. She possessed an unusual resilience, a quiet strength that emanated from her, subtly counteracting any lingering shadows of despair in the recovering population. She was, in a way, the true living cornerstone of the new freelance. Lyra, bearing the mantle of leadership and the private grief of Kaelen's loss, watched the new world bloom. She led the defense against the final incursions of the scattered Dark Legion forces, ensuring the peace Kaelen had died for was secured. She never forgot the lone warrior's recklessness or his courage, and she taught the new generation that the greatest power was not found in magic or arms, but in the willingness to stand against an impossible darkness, even when utterly alone. The story of Kaelen, the lone warrior who stunned the Empress's army and sacrificed himself to shatter the darkness, became the central myth of the Free Lands. It was a story of defiance, of impossible odds, and of the profound truth that sometimes, the only way to achieve absolute victory is through absolute, final surrender. The vampire princess Empress was gone, her reign replaced by the hopeful, if often messy, dawn of freedom, all thanks to the warrior who fought alone until the very end,